So you may have seen a video recently published by Paul Joseph Watson called "Has Our Culture Hit a Dead End?" In the video, Watson discussed the creative stagnation and decline of innovation in all forms of art and media. Films, TV shows, and music have become bland, boring, and derivative. I couldn't agree more, and it's something that I think has warranted discussion for some time now. Modern pop music sounds incredibly manufactured and generic because it basically is. There's no originality left in the industry when songs are essentially produced via algorithms. Music now is monotonous, meaningless, and without any soul or depth, and it all just sounds the same. True talent is hard to find, and it's why people now listen to older music from decades ago rather than today's dull dross aimed at NPCs. Likewise, with TV shows and films, everything is a sequel, prequel, or reboot. Big budget franchises dominate the box office. Studios rely on the built-in and dedicated pre-existing fan bases of the big comic book, superhero, or sci-fi action franchises such as Marvel, DC, Star Wars, and Star Trek, because they're too afraid to spend money on original stories and new ideas for fear of them being commercial failures. So they continue to tap into audience nostalgia for films that audiences are already familiar with. We keep getting what are essentially the same types of films from the same genres and franchises over and over again. Nothing is original, nothing is novel, nothing is daring. It's all safe and homogeneous. Very few films strive to be more than brainless popcorn affairs. The audience rarely has to intellectually engage with the stories because there's nothing to engage with. Watson also remarks on the overuse of CGI in today's blockbusters. Because so much of what we see on screen isn't real, we don't really connect with what's happening on screen emotionally or cognitively when compared to films that don't use much CGI or any at all. You can watch the latest CGI-filled action film and then not really remember much of it 2 hours later. Whole chunks of your memory of the film just become simplified into a giant blur. Now, I can certainly think of a few films that get the balance right. Films like Inception. Plenty of CGI, but used wisely. And also, there's loads of practical effects. It's a memorable and intelligent story that requires the audience to focus and pay attention. The world that's created by Christopher Nolan has a set of rules and science all of its own that's far more cerebral than most sci-fi action films. The film is first and foremost driven by its characters and an incredibly strong and clever story. The action and CGI effects are secondary. I liked Avengers Infinity War, but if I'm honest, there's nothing original or genuinely innovative about it. Like most MCU installments, it's a CGI-heavy action film that my mind registers mostly as a blur of a few fragments of things that happened. It was a film that entertained me in the cinema, but didn't stay with me after I left the cinema in the way movies like Ex Machina, Logan, or 2001: A Space Odyssey did. Don't get me wrong, I do look forward to Endgame, but as nothing more than a cinema thrill ride. After that, I think I'll probably be done with the MCU. This superhero genre has become a cash grab exercise for studios, and I'm surprised audience patience has lasted as long as it has. Our MTV generation grew up with fast-paced music videos, so we have the brainware to process the information and number of frames that are coming at us at high speed, but we can't emotionally connect with the content and store it in memory in the same way we can with films of a slower pace. It's like our minds are so busy trying to process and keep up with the amount of detail and sheer number of editing cuts in the films that they lose their emotional impact the more complex they become. So many movies today, made for well over $100 million, just leave absolutely no impact after watching them. A sci-fi action film like Terminator 2: Judgment Day continues to be fresh in my mind all these years later because it wasn't a CGI-heavy, shaky cam, lens flare-filled blur. Yeah, there was CGI in it, but nowhere near as much as modern films. It was used very sparingly because of the limitations of the technology back in 1991 and the fact that it was also very expensive. Necessity often is the mother of invention, and the action sequences in that film were mostly practical, more realistic, and far more memorable than what we see today. I believe one of the reasons for this is because almost anything is possible with CGI now. Audiences are bamboozled with too much visual complexity that it's overwhelming, and they kind of become numb to what's on screen at a certain point. Furthermore, because the plots are often so derivative or shallow, serving only to drive the CGI action scenes, the films and their cinematography become less memorable because in order to compensate for the lack of story and keep audiences from noticing plot holes and lack of depth, the films are edited and paced at an incredibly fast tempo. Too much visual stimuli is coming at you at breakneck speed. It's an assault on the senses for 2 hours. Compare modern action films to older ones and ask yourself, how accurately are you able to remember and break down the films chronologically, scene by scene, and explain how the plot and character development unfolded? You might find it easier to do with older films. What we're sadly seeing nowadays is commercial interests negatively affecting artistic expression and prioritizing profits over creativity. Films are no longer leaving an impact on audiences in the way they should. I'm going to give you a list of several films that have left an impact on me. They're not all big-budget action blockbusters. Now, some of them are, but some of them are small-budget indie films. Some of them are comedies, thrillers, and dramas. And I'm not comparing those kinds of films to modern CGI-filled action blockbusters, as it's unfair to compare very different film genres with very different budgets, but I just wanted to tell you the films I found memorable and impactful, and to demonstrate that to make a great film, it doesn't mean you have to spend a gargantuan sum of money. Sleuth, the original from 1972, with Laurence Olivier and Michael Caine. The Green Mile, Good Will Hunting, the hilarious Clue from 1985, Blazing Saddles, the incredibly brain-taxing masterpiece Memento from Christopher Nolan from 2000, M. Night Shyamalan's Signs, 1995's Casino, The Shawshank Redemption, Limitless, Gran Torino, Independence Day, The Fifth Element, Blade Runner, Star Trek II The Wrath of Khan, The Matrix, and as I mentioned earlier, Inception, Logan, 2001 A Space Odyssey, and Ex Machina. These aren't a part of a list of my favorite films, it's just a random list of old and not so old films that I'll never forget. They left an impression, they were memorable, and I spent time thinking about their stories and their characters years after seeing them. Let me know what films left an impact on you in the comments below, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.